So warm welcome today to Gordon. Mattey, who's a serial entrepreneur and veteran in the blockchain space. We're honored and grateful to have him here. So please put your hands together to welcome Gordon. We'll begin if he could introduce himself, give a background of his journey, and then he could maybe give an update with regards to what he's working on now and his vision for the future. So please, Gordon.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me here. Thanks, Yip, as well, and the unit team. Let me know if my audio is coming through clear or not. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I've prepared a few slides to kind of walk through those things. And hello, everyone. Really glad to have you here. So yeah, I'm Gordon Mattey. Currently live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the United States of America. From England originally, so come via London, then to Los Angeles, and then to Austin, and then here during COVID. My background is, I studied computer science and business at school. I have 20 years in product and engineering leadership, working on all sorts of different digital technologies, both as a startup entrepreneur as well as an entrepreneur running innovation teams within companies such as Ticketmaster, Yahoo, Comcast, Sony, and the list goes on. Working on a whole host of different product offerings, everything from direct to consumer offerings, selling technology into businesses to enable their platforms, as well as enabling companies to deliver more advanced consumer services across media and e-commerce and finance. My journey into crypto actually is something that started a long time ago for me. So I'm just going to give everyone a quick overview of that. Yeah, back in 2001, I read this book called Peer-to-Peer. It was focused on, at the time, was the kind of primary architecture for the web, which was a decentralized compute infrastructure without any centralization, really, at the very beginning. And I was fascinated by it. And this book talked about all the challenges that you have around kind of incentive mechanisms and the tragedy of the commons and what can happen if people don't support the network by giving things, but just take all the time within the systems. Then moving into 2007, I was working heavily kind of within the media ecosystem, looking at how companies distribute information about media assets, particularly around video and music, as well as kind of the rights around those assets. And I had an idea to create something that was very much an open data, open protocol, open services platform that would enable kind of an entire ecosystem to work in a way that would maximize the creativity of the people that were putting content into the system, and created open viewing foundation. But I struggled with kind of three things that really I was unable to solve at the time, which were security, trust, and incentives. Because when you have a collaborative system, it's very, very difficult to ensure that those three things can actually manifest in terms of properties. And so the project never really evolved beyond an idea and a small team trying to get it going. And then in 2017, I'd heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but in late 2017, I actually took a deep dive into it and read the Ethereum white paper, which I hadn't done before. So I'm kind of late, maybe not. Actually, I think everyone is still early. If you're looking at crypto, you're still very early. And when I read the white paper, it just blew my mind. I realized that the three things that I was struggling with around trust, incentives, and security could be solved through tokens and smart contracts, primarily. And so at that point, I realized, based on my history, the rest of my career had been set on a new trajectory and was going to be focused on these kind of decentralized peer-to-peer technology-based systems. If you think about what technology has done for us, really it's enabling global communities of amateurs or professional consumers, prosumers, to collaborate in order to make and do things at massive scale. We've seen early examples of this happening with things like Wikipedia and the democratization of the creation of information. And then obviously, most interestingly, what happened, in the last 10 years was the creation of Bitcoin, and the democratization of money. And what I mean by Bitcoin in this example is really just the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem. Bitcoin for me is the grandfather of all cryptocurrencies. If Bitcoin isn't successful, nothing else will be, in my opinion. And so I kind of point to this as the genesis of us coming together. Obviously, there was a leader behind Bitcoin in terms of Satoshi, but the broader ecosystem of people that have a high interest in creating these new incentive structures and environments are really focused on doing that around money. And then most interestingly, what's happened recently is a great example of what happens when we actually can activate communities to do things with money. So the example of Reddit, Wall Street Bets, operating essentially a decentralized hedge fund, a community-based hedge fund that was able to drastically influence kind of the market, and also put community and kind of support behind existing companies in a way that has never really been done before at all. And if we think about what that actually means, I think that what we see happening within cryptocurrency is really the most diverse breeding ground of experimentation and how we come together as a community to coordinate production of different things. Unit is actually a great example of that, focused on doing this in all sorts of different areas from a local and global perspective, across different industries. But even the most advanced and forward-thinking researchers and professors in the space, people like Noam Chomsky, have talked about this movement in general terms. I mean, Noam doesn't really talk about cryptocurrencies, but talks about this concept of workers coming together as a community or as a syndicate to make collective decisions as a form of direct democracy. And that is really, really interesting because we don't really have a mechanism for, we don't really, as a society, we don't really have a strong understanding of how to be democratic, right? We kind of largely rely on our government-based systems for democracy and decision-making. And there are reasons why we do that. It helps with efficiency. It helps us kind of deploy resources and money for the benefit of the public. But there's very large kind of disparity across economies globally in terms of how public goods and services are created, and also how we manage kind of private goods and services as well. And so cryptocurrency, what I see happening right now is us really experimenting on how we can kind of take control of our money and how we can make decisions about how that money gets utilized. And then if we look at what's happening with cryptocurrency in general, it really is going mainstream in my opinion and many other people, in that the media cycle right now around cryptocurrency really exploded. Obviously NFTs, non-fungible tokens, this really focused around crypto art and the digitization of art, enabling artists to create and own their work, number one, and then have complete control over how that work is distributed and a direct relationship with the consumer. That's just one aspect, but what we see happening across the board, both in terms of companies that are putting money into Bitcoin, people like Tesla, for example, but also the entire kind of banking system and investment infrastructure, also really driving the adoption of cryptocurrencies. We have JP Morgan, who traditionally has said, don't do anything with Bitcoin, don't even touch it. Now, offering private banking services to wealthy individuals to be able to invest in cryptocurrencies. And then, most recently, of course, El Salvador indicating a move to using Bitcoin as legal tender, which has all sorts of second order effects on the entire global ecosystem. When they enact that, what that means is that every other country needs to recognize Bitcoin as a currency, because today it doesn't. Like if you operate in the United States, for example, cryptocurrency is treated as property. And so it has very different kind of implications from a tax, particularly from a tax perspective. Where I am in Oklahoma, we actually have in Tulsa, the first bank in the United States that's federally regulated, offering cryptocurrency custody services and swapping services to move in and out of crypto and the US dollar. They launched those, in the process of rolling those services out, and have transferred the first bank to transfer crypto on behalf of a client in the US. And so from a retail perspective, so these aren't, institutional accounts. These are traditional kind of bank accounts that you can walk in, or you can call your branch or use a website and access cryptocurrencies. And so this entire movement, from the way I see it, is that it enables us to really think about bootstrapping a completely new kind of economic fabric. If we think about what's been happening for the last 10 years, and intensely, I would say for the last 10 years, really the advent of YouTube and all of these kind of consumer media experiences, and of course, Google as well, the focus has been on finding stuff, really being much more efficient in terms of how we consume. How do we discover new content? How do we consume it? You see this, of course, in all of the addictive experiences that have been created from Instagram and et cetera, where it's all very focused on demand, and search is primarily the economy that we focus on. Instagram obviously presents content in the form of a feed, but a feed is really an optimized form of search that's just trying to predict what you want to see before you have to type it in. And these, when we think about what cryptocurrencies enable, and this focus on communities and the democratization of the production of money and all of these other different types of assets, it enables us to move from thinking about finding stuff to actually doing stuff. And so it shifts the equation quite a bit, completely opposite, in fact, to focus on not consumption, but production. We don't focus on what we need, but what we can create and what we can supply to the world. And really then the optimization and the way that we actually need to work together is really a coordination challenge in terms of maximizing the input of the resources and the people and the knowledge that we have to actually do things in a more efficient way, and also provide our skill sets in a more efficient way as well. If we have a particular skill, for example, if I'm really good at kind of modeling kind of economic systems, then I can find a place actually and support multiple projects to come into existence with that one skill set, versus working for a company for 10 years, focused just on their projects and within their domain. I can actually have a much broader impact on a much broader ecosystem. And the ecosystem is extremely broad if you think about what money actually does. The focus of cryptocurrency has really been on money, but money isn't the thing. Money flows because of the things that we do. It flows because of the resources that we're kind of extracting from the environment, the way that we produce those resources and manufacture them into goods, and the ability to trade them, the ability to move them around from a transportation perspective. And these things are really, really important in terms of thinking about what money is actually used for. And we have a whole system that we call the kind of financial industry that sits to one side that supports all of these things. And what's really happening, and the way I see it working, is that, and what's happening today actually, is money is being put inside the thing. So money flows as an object inside the asset. You can pair money with real estate, you can pair money with steel, you can pair money with art. And so there's a much more interesting way that we can use money and have a direct control over it, versus a kind of tangential banking infrastructure that's very opaque and very difficult to kind of integrate with. And so for me, what that brings up is, the areas I really care about and what I spend most of my time focused on, how do we actually kind of use the technology in these ways to enable communities to focus on production and be more efficient with the way that we coordinate the work that we need to do as a society. And so that means taking a look at primitives of digital assets. What is a token? What are the different structures that can be afforded by tokens? How do tokens work with one another? How do we exchange tokens and swap them with one another? And how do we engineer these systems? And really how are they actually going to work in reality? Like, There's a lot of, I would say the state of the art right now is really focused on thinking about how we can kind of define these token economic systems and engineer them, but then simulate in reality how they might actually work based on different inputs into the system. So how do we actually model those at scale, and how do we actually build confidence around these systems? It's definitely harder within the cryptocurrency environment to come up with an idea and put it out there and iterate on it, because the nature of the technology is such that we want to drive a lot of trust in what we're putting out there, and so there's a lot of need for control in terms of updating things. Unlike someone like Facebook that's shipping code 300 or 400 times a day to improve their web and mobile experiences, we don't generally deploy these systems at all on that frequency. And so the more that we can do to kind of model different scenarios and be adaptable to what might happen, the better off we'll be in terms of providing a stable infrastructure. But like I said, digital assets and money is one thing, and how these tokens might work with one another. But really, it's for me, the broader kind of way that we organize ourselves and come together as an organization is very, very interesting. A natively digital organization, one that's born on the web, that's born with digital interaction as the only way that people generally kind of communicate with one another and exchange value, is a very new way of working with each other. We're really looking at how we come together in a community-driven way that's more bottom up versus top down. That's the traditional kind of hierarchical structure, and so we need new tools and new capabilities and new services that can help us come together in a way that can bring people together for a minute, for a day, for a month, for a year, forever. And there's a huge amount of excitement in the people that I talk to, particularly. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but particularly within the kind of the creator economy, artists of all kinds across music and television production and game development, that are really, really interested in how they're very naturally already kind of operating in a way that's very much bottom up, right? When an artist conceives of a song or an album and wants to put it out in the world, they bring their team together. They bring people that they've connected with over the time to produce and distribute and market and sell and connect with their community. They bring a much greater team together. And so they're looking at how these digital organizations can really help them accelerate and simplify the work that they need to do in terms of bringing their art into the world. And then fundamentally, my long-term interest, I think the next 20 years is really going to be, I think we're still very early in this area in terms of thinking about how we can pool knowledge together as a society in order to make more efficient and better decisions. I mentioned kind of the need for token modeling before, and modeling these economic systems. There's no reason why those things should be closed. The more that we can share those things with other people, the better off everyone else is going to be from learning from each other. And I think that that's just one example of how we can start to think about pooling knowledge together. We do it from a code perspective, predominantly within the crypto space today, where we use tools like GitHub to share code with one another. But we have other primitives that we need to create and knowledge that we can bring together as a society to be much more efficient in terms of how we produce things for our society. And so, leading to where I am now, like there's a lot of things that need to be worked on. This is kind of like a snapshot of a number of different projects that I'm working on today. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in these areas, but those categories of where money goes and what money is used for, I'm working in those areas to really kind of experiment, develop new products, start new companies, build teams around going after interesting things that I think add a lot of value. You can notice here, like on the culture section is really big right now, and it's big because there's just a lot of activity around culture and using non-fungible tokens, NFTs, to create and distribute art. And so I'm working on a number of things within music, fashion, gaming, and digital collectibles as well, and helping a number of different teams get bootstrapped and providing my expertise in those areas. Outside of kind of consulting as well, I work on a number of different teams. There is a team that's broadly creating a set of syndicates around focusing on these different industries, and so I run the Culture Syndicate, which is a decentralized team of about 25 developers globally working on delivering crypto-based solutions to solve these problems, but I also contribute to a number of other teams that focus specifically on data or money as well. And most recently, I started working and advising a company called RealX. I thought this would be interesting to bring up because of their mission. So, RealX is focused on empowering anyone to get access to investing in real estate, which is traditionally or contemporarily, I would say, an asset that's very difficult for people to enter into, and tokenizing real estate assets that are typically distressed, converting them into much higher utility within the particular region that the real estate exists within, and really focusing on improving the kind of environmental footprint of the real estate, as well as the social impact footprint of the real estate in a particular environment. So, for example, converting a piece of real estate into social housing, and enabling people to invest in, giving people access to housing where it's needed, but also opening up that investment to the broader public, rather than just accredited investors or people that happen to know which real estate to invest in on a one-time basis. So RealX is building a portfolio of global assets, and is focused on a mission to help, particularly in the United States, one of the biggest communities of people that really don't have access is our students. Students with debt. The amount of debt that a student takes on in the United States to go through their education is increasing year over year. Really hampers someone's ability to invest in wealth generation, and so we're focused on giving students access to these real estate investments, and we'll be granting students that have active debt to be part of the community and to help bring this to the world. So we're very, very early at this point, but we plan to do a public offering at the end of this year. That's going to be one of the first kind of, not one of the, I mean, one of the few kind of SEC, government regulated token assets that have been created to date. So kind of in conclusions, I think for this audience, I know that you guys have a huge or varied kind of background and varied level of interest and or commitment to the space today. And so the kind of takeaways for me are that I think for you guys to think about are that these digital organizations are different. I would say about 70% of the work that I'm doing today has come from connections I've made online first, right? So I've connected with people on Twitter, I've connected with people on Discord, in Discord groups, and those conversations have led to opportunities to be involved in projects, whether that's to contribute on a small scale, on a large scale, or even to actually create new projects off the back of those projects. And so these digital organizations are born in a very different way. They scout for talent in a different way. They're much more open in terms of looking for people to maybe like fit in the right way to something that needs to be done. They're much more open in terms of the information that they're sharing about what's happening, but they're also very different in terms of the way they behave and the way that you might work in them. Like, it's not a 9-to-5 job. The teams typically, for the ones I work on, are spread from Australia to the west coast of the US and everywhere in between. And so the way they communicate and behave are very, very different. And so getting, even just seeing what's happening in any of these spaces is interesting. Contributing a little will get you even further. And really, it's still super early. I know there's a lot of hype right now, but if you look at the total kind of economic capture of crypto versus the total kind of economic footprint of the world. Like we're still in a very kind of early adopter phase. And so what we have is a very small talent pool to pick from in terms of, creating these systems and projects. And it's not just technical people that we need. We need people in marketing. We need people in operations. We need people in finance. We need people in human resource management. We need all sorts of skill sets to actually help scale kind of these organizations up. But fundamentally, we don't have a lot of talent to draw from. And so very excited about new people coming into the space that might be able to bring their special skills and their unique talents to bear to kind of enable this to continue to exist and thrive. So with that, I'll conclude and say thank you, and I think we can open for questions, and thanks very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Gordon. That was super interesting and inspiring. First question here from Yip. What are, in your view, important elements to build motivated and successful teams for digital organizations?
That's a very good question. I think that number one, transparency is really important. Like kind of knowing where you might sit within an within kind of the framework of an organization is important. Like, am I part of the core team? Am I part of a working group? Am I, what is my membership? But I think before we even get to there, like the more an organization can be open about its needs for contribution, or a particular skill set, or the work that it's trying to do in a given day or week or sprint, or however they might be planning kind of their work, the more open that can be, the much easier it is for people to be able to connect and have a motivation to connect and propose a contribution. I think that I think it's still not quite, we're still not quite there in terms of kind of how you might contract with an organization. A lot of organizations are really experimenting with kind of these modes of contribution. Like maybe you might not get paid to begin with to contribute to a project, whether that's in US dollars or in the token of the project potentially. Maybe that will come after the fact. Maybe it will be based on kind of the merit of the work that you actually provide. I think these organizations are really very much a meritocracy in the same way that open source is in general, where the quality of what you provide is very visible. And so I think, just having a lot of openness in terms of what someone can be motivated to connect with and contribute to, I think is really a critical first step. And then, in terms of kind of the success of a team, I don't think it's any different than a traditional team. It all boils down to communication. It's still a human to human interaction, whether that's one-on-one or in a group of people. So it's the same types of things that you would see in a traditional organization that would help a digital organization succeed. But I think ultimately the difference is really around the transparency, around information, and the value of contribution.
I guess going back to your incredible presentation earlier, I'd love to hear like your vision for the future. So given all of these technological and societal shifts happen, like how do you envision someone living their life in 2030? Like what are major shifts in human behavior? Like what's particularly exciting for you?
I can't think that far ahead. I mean, I do fundamentally think that there's a lot of waste of human talent, right? The way that we kind of approach work and the way that companies organize themselves around work, really, the reason for a company of any kind existing is really to most efficiently bring resources together. And then the biggest challenge there is actually, utilizing the talent that exists within that organization. Because what might happen is that, you start working on something and then it's no longer the most important thing for the company, and then it's never talked about, and then it's never really rewarded. And like, then your motivation goes down. And if you look at the trends around, people's happiness in the work environment, it's not getting any better on a global basis typically. And so when I think about kind of human motivation and the ability for us to feel valued in terms of our existence or our being on this planet, I think about like how we can create the most impact with our talents. And I think that for me, the vision of the future is one where people are happy and motivated in what they do, and that work might not be for profit. It may not. Who knows what might happen in the future? Maybe we are in a kind of a relatively very kind of rich society where not everyone has to work as much as we do, or whatever it might be. I don't know how things might change from that perspective, but I do think that if we focus on valuing contribution, then I think we'll be in a better place ultimately. I kind of think about the input versus the output. Like, just let's focus on getting people kind of motivated to contribute in a way that is clear for them. That said, there's still a place for non-technology. Like, my wife is a midwife, a home birth midwife, and her focus is to remove technology and only use technology where it's absolutely necessary to support the birth of a child. And so I don't think technology is the only solution for everything in our society, but it's certainly, I think gives us a lot of freedom. And I'm excited about what's happening in space as well, and working on a number of different, a few things there around. Actually, we're putting some art into space on a satellite and on the moon, and working with SpaceX on Doge1, which is an initiative to put Dogecoin into space. And it's really about, like, what is that post kind of Earth society look like, and a lot of the technologies that are required for space are required on Earth as well. Like, there's a lot of robotics and automation that we still haven't seen at massive scale kind of getting deployed. There's a huge amount of work that we do as a society that's humans moving things around. And I think robotics is definitely going to take over and really support us having not to do hard labor like that in the future. And so that also just opens up the kind of opportunity space on how our talents might be used in the world in terms of thinking about our contribution. And I think that means a lot more art, honestly, a lot more beauty in the world. I think we're moving into kind of a phase where we will value that a lot more, like the art I have on the wall behind me, for example. And NFTs and tokenizing art is just one piece of it, but it's really around the creation and distribution of that art that I think is interesting to me as well.
Amazing, super cool. A nice follow-up question from Yip. What is the role of tokens and cryptocurrency in that future? How will it be used? Where, in what areas do you see it large-scale, everyday adoption happening first?
I think it's driven, number one, by code. I think that there's a lot of software that runs in the world that we don't have control over, which creates a whole host of different challenges for companies. Like, did we calculate this set of contractual terms correctly, right? If you and I are engaging in business and we have a contract in place for me to deliver some kind of good to you, like, and that happens, like, how do we know that you pay me the right amount and I get it within the time frame that we agreed on? And I think that and right now, and we're relying much more on software to make these types of decisions. And I think a lot of this software will become shared, a piece of code that will operate a contract to agree the kind of the pricing and the volume and the discounts and things like this is going to be the same piece of code that runs for everyone. So we have a lot of efficiency by making this code open and public and running in an environment that's trustless, like in Ethereum, for example, which is a trustless compute layer, if you will. And so I think I think the whole domain of code is really the first area where we're going to be seeing these cryptocurrencies kind of get embedded a lot more. Another area is around like I think just we rely heavily on software to do things. So even if I work with a SaaS vendor, a software as a service vendor that's providing to me, for example, a CRM tool, and they're saying, look, it's going to cost the cost for operating the system, like a Salesforce, for example, the cost of operating the system is X, because it requires a certain amount of compute and storage. How do they actually prove to me as a customer that they're actually taking up A, that amount of storage, and B, that amount of compute? I think we're going to see a lot more need to measure these things in a way that really quantifies the use of resources and quantifies the value that the software brings. And I think that we'll see tokens get used in that way a lot more. And I think of code as a digital asset in the same way that art, a digital piece of art, might be an asset, or a tokenized piece of real estate might be an asset. But I think it's the thing that's being created the most. And so I think that it's the thing that's going to be, at least within this space. So I think it's the thing that's going to be most appropriately kind of used as and paired with a token.
Amazing, super cool. Nice question from Ida. How are the distressed assets collateralized to be given the value so that it can be tokenized? I mean, are the owners of the distressed assets using your DeFi platform as a means to raise further capital via tokenization tied to the distressed assets?
Yeah. So we are going to be providing an open platform that enables any property owner to come in, or any investor, or anyone that wants to convert a piece of property, for example, and collateralize it. Obviously, it also supports investors coming in as well. I think initially, our kind of initial go-to-market involves us raising money to buy those assets and collateralize them. But ultimately, this can be running on an open set of protocols for RealX to enable that broadly for anyone. I think that another piece of it is also making sure these assets are smart versus being dumb assets. So, knowing that the asset truly exists, which is a bit of a challenge. People have tried to tokenize real estate to date, and these projects don't necessarily even have a real estate asset sitting there. So how do you actually verify the asset exists, and how do you really measure the contribution? And I think that there's only so much you can do with technology. I think that there's a whole set of kind of game mechanics or mechanics around proving assets' existence and impact as well. And more broadly, I think there's a huge amount of things happening in the kind of carbon credits and energy space as well, like the tokenization of farmland, the tokenization of forests, for the benefit of essentially providing a carbon offset as a token as well. And I think that's also another primitive that plays into kind of these tokenized real estate assets as well. I mean, the nice thing about real estate ultimately is that it generally has some kind of base value. And so even though crypto might fluctuate significantly, an asset that is generating revenue because of rents can certainly provide kind of like a hedge against what might be happening from a crypto perspective.
Amazing. A question here from Yip. What was the missing link to get your first project going? Was it lack of technology, lack of market readiness, or what else was it in the way? And how did you find the motivation to start another venture?
I think it is having a very clear idea of what the problem is that you're going after to solve. As a technologist myself, like I can get lost in the idea of creating something, because creating software is very much like a piece of art, and so you put a lot of yourself into it, and you can kind of get lost in the art, but unlike art, it has a very direct utility. And so you have to think about how those problems can be solved and the best way of solving them. And I think the more you can do in terms of truly kind of validating that problem exists, the better. And that's not unlike any other technology. I think crypto is not different from that perspective. I mean, there are a set of kind of technology constraints as well. Like, you can't necessarily do everything you want to do because certain things might not exist. And so certainly, you know, that kind of just changes kind of what you think about who the customer is. You know, there might be a set of customers that's kind of a consumer focus or a business focus, but ultimately there are still a lot of tooling that needs to be put in place, which means focusing on developers and thinking about what they might be building. And that kind of broadens like all of the different areas that you might touch in terms of industries. But they might have all these developers might have a common set of issues that that they need to solve. So for example, on Ethereum, there's a bunch of kind of technology frameworks that help you kind of create a smart contract to read the data from a from the blockchain and things like this. And so the tooling itself is still something that's very early, and I think in a lot of places I see there's still opportunity there for companies to drastically simplify how complex it is to build some of these applications.
Amazing. Question here from Yip. How in general do you manage to be part of so many different projects and not burned out?
I mean, I'm a workaholic, and the number one recovering workaholic, I should say. And the number one thing you have to do is just put a boundary around your time. That's the only thing I can do. And then I'm time bound. I simply can't do another project, like a computer not being able to do another process because it's limited in that way. So I put boundaries around my time.
Amazing. And maybe final question before we head off to the breakout rooms. What's been your happiest moment personally and professionally?
I mean, the birth of my children personally, of course. I have 3 kids, and so each one of those is magical in lots of different ways. Professionally, I think that I think moving and quitting my job at Ticketmaster and committing to going into the unknown. I was working for Ticketmaster in late 2017. Like I said, realized the stuff I've been thinking about for 20 years was a possible reality, and so that shift into moving into the unknown in terms of how I'm going to get paid and what is this ecosystem, is this real? There's a lot of scams going on, and just working through all of that was concerning, but also super exciting. I had a real resonance with what was happening in the space. I love the concept of democratization fundamentally, and so being able to spend all of my time on that and not having to go and work for another company in a traditional job is professionally the most exciting thing for me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gordon. Really appreciate your insights and your time and advice and you for the future.